Oh, goodness me, people, where does it end? It doesn't end. You know, I could make videos all day long, all throughout the day, because there's so many things that people need to hear. So, I often speak to you about Richard Dawkins. Now, Richard Dawkins is an ethologist, an animal behaviourist. And curious enough, I've never ever seen him out in the field watching animals like Robert Sapolsky. Robert Sapolsky, he's got qualifications in a certain realm, which I forget what it is, but I think he teaches human psychology at university. But he's been out into the field for 25 years studying baboons, and so I don't think he calls himself an ethologist, but he is one, whereas Dawkins calls himself one, and yet I've never ever seen him, like David Attenborough, looking at a bug or an animal or nothing. So go figure, all I've ever seen him doing is discounting Christianity and campaigning for atheism. Isn't that bizarre? If we look, he's written, you know, quite a lot of books. Most of the books are about like the God delusion, this sort of thing. The Selfish Gene is what I thought he was qualified in, was some sort of evolutionary biology. But anyway, by the by, he's great at what he does, and he's held in very, very high regard for being a high intellect, and he's very sought after all over the world, and he's still going strong at 82 years old. And I often call him Dogma Dawkins, because I've heard him speak with people like Deepak Chopra and other spiritual people, and he's really exceedingly dismissive to a point whereby it's naive, because this world, this experience, the whole thing about it to me seems to be spiritual. Everything seems to be spiritual, and when we can't even state with a surety that there's physical matter here, even though there appears to be physical matter, but when the greatest scientists on the planet tell us that in actual fact there's not, and we can have lots of experiences which tell us that even if there is this so-called physical matter here, we can enter into a whole myriad of other ones where there isn't any physical matter. So anyway, all that is a preamble to Dogma Dawkins. He dismisses the spiritual completely, which I think is a great detriment to any intellect, and I don't know how that works. I really don't know how that works, and I've often thought that maybe he was schooled in a Catholic school, you know, with Catholic priests, and you know what they do to people, and I was speculating that he had that done to him. That's why he's so vehemently opposed, emotionally. Every vessel in his body is opposed to that religion because of what some of these religions do. Now, I'm just watching the video, and it's Dawkins, and it's him interviewing a lady, female psychologist, who was born into a religious cult, a Christian sect, I forget which this particular sect was. Maybe I'll find it in a minute. Maybe she'll say it, but it's not that important. But what she was saying is that, you know, it completely ruined her life. It poisoned her brain, and now what she's doing is she's kind of campaigning, you know, to address this, and she deals with many patients which have suffered from religious indoctrination, poisoning, and other psychological issues. But I'm just going to play you a bit of this, and so you can see what I'm always speaking about. I'm always speaking about, look, whatever you people think out there is true. You really do need to think greater about it. You need to think deeper. You need to think longer, harder, and all the rest of it, because most people don't have any handle on their own psychology. They don't know the root of all their beliefs and indoctrinations and programming, or this, that and the other. And if some of you do know it a little bit, then I would have thought the first thing that you would have done was investigate your own psychology, like what anyone that wakes up does. So listen to what Dawkins and this lady has to say, and let's talk about it a little bit more after.
What I call the assembly conscience. So it's a moral judgments given to them by the people around them. And if their parents and their church and their school are all the same people, then that's all they ever hear. They only ever hear the moral judgments of their particular group. And it's interesting once, actually. Can I tell you a little story?
Please, yeah. And I've often said to you people about, you know, when people ask me questions, do you think that this is correct, or do you think that, or what do you think about this, and what do you think about that? I'm like, look, you can never ever nail me down on any of these social norm things, because I've travelled around the world extensively, and I've lived in many, many different cultures, and I've seen how many other variety of human social interaction works. And I always speak about the most emotionally moving and potentially disturbing to any moralist. And I speak about the sexual connotation of the age of consent. Because when I was living in Africa, I was reading all these books on history and slavery and this, that and the other, and I discovered that until very, very recently, tribes were still selling their daughters into marriage as soon as they began to menstruate, because as soon as they began to menstruate, they were considered to be women. You know, African people out on the bush, if they're menstruating, then they can have babies, so surely they can have sex, and they do. And this is why in these African continents you see what appears to be children with what you would think are their brothers and sisters on their hips when they're only about 10 or 12 years old, but they're not, they're their children. And that's how it is, and that's how it was many, many years ago. But only in recent times have we got so stringent about, you know, what age we can have sex at and all these different sort of things. But I'm always saying, you know, look into your own psychology and look outside of your social conditioning, if at all possible, people. And, you know, try to grow and try to evolve and try to realise that you've just been programmed and you're living in a program. And everybody within your social arena is subject to the same programming. But if you've got people coming from Afghanistan and the Middle East and that, then what in their countries to this day, doubtless they are still marrying and having sex and babies at 13 years old, maybe even younger. And of course in the Quran, Muhammad married a 9-year-old girl. One of the girls he married was a 9-year-old girl. That was how it was back then. And people modern times say, oh, Muhammad was a so-and-so because of that. But that's just how it is in these ancient worlds. That's how it was. You know, we really do need to open our minds.
I lived in Switzerland for a while. I was married, I had 2 small children, and I went into a children's clothes shop and I saw this lovely tweed coat in there, and it reminded me of home. So I felt moved towards buying this coat, and I picked it off the shelf, took it up to the counter, and then I saw it had it was double-breasted, 2 rows of buttons. Oh, I don't like double-breasted coats, came into my head. And it was like suddenly I had what you might call an epiphany, I suppose, because it suddenly struck me, hang on a minute, it's not me that doesn't like double-breasted coats, it's my mother. So I bought the coat, and I walked out the shop, and it suddenly struck me very forcibly that actually an awful lot of my beliefs, an awful lot of my attitudes and my values were not mine. they were either imparted to me by my parents or by the church. And of course, as a child, that was one and the same thing.
Yeah.
And I walked out and I went home and I actually felt that I wanted to go out and commit murder just to find out for myself whether it was right or wrong.
Yes.
I hasten to add I didn't, but there was that feeling that I wanted to go out there and explore for myself what was right for me, what was wrong for me.
I suppose a non-religious moral upbringing might start with something like the golden rule, and a child is told, how would you like it
Yes.
if somebody else did that to you, so why do you do it to them? Would that be a foreign concept to the Exclusive Brethren, because they would
Yes.
say it's wrong?
The Exclusive Brethren, that was the cult that she was born into. And she says, look, you don't get a choice to join these things. If your family members, your parents are embroiled in these cults, well, when you are born, you're born into it. You know, I was friends with someone for several years who was indoctrinated into the Opus Dei Christian cult. And to this day, the whole of his family, like 4 brothers and 1 sister, absolutely stricken with mental disorders due to the mind mangling that went on, because they were taught stuff that was just preposterous. It was just all about whatever the Opus Dei book said. And if any of the brothers asked questions, then they will give a swift belt around the ear and, you know, chastise for even daring to think for themselves.
Wrong because God says it's wrong, or the elders say it's wrong.
I think in a lot of religions that is the case, that a moral sense is not, an individual moral sense is not developed. It is what the Bible says, or what the Quran says, or whatever the particular religious book is, or what the leaders say is right or wrong. So it's not about, yes, it's not about the golden rule. It's not about how would you like it if somebody did that to you.
So it's a stultification of the moral sense and of the intellectual sense, because you've already talked about how the intellectual route to inquiry by a child is stultified. And now
Yes.
you're saying also that the moral route is stultified as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I can't really think of any aspect of growing up that isn't stultified by that kind of upbringing.
Yes.
So this is why I'm so vehemently opposed to religion, people. And this is why lots of you may think like, oh, you know, give the Christians a break, and you know, you sound like, you know, you're stuck in a groove with all this sort of thing. But this level of indoctrination is exceedingly powerful, exceedingly pervasive, and if you can get a handle, if you're not religious, on how you can see that this indoctrination and hypnosis works on other people, then just look at yourselves with what you've been taught as secular children in your schools about what the world is, and you know, what science is, and all these different sorts of things, because it's just an equal amount of indoctrination, and there probably is no more truth in it than there is in these religious sects. And so we really do need to step outside of the whole bunch of that stuff, because it's all poison. We need to think for ourselves, we need to question ourselves, and we need to do our own research. And only then we will start to have minds of our own. And so these religious people that I'm often jousting with on the channel, they are these people. They are absolutely caught hook, line and sinker. They will never ever escape. Many people never escape. They just can't. Their brains have been moulded. Their train of thought has been conditioned and narrowed down and channeled. They will never get out of it. And that's why I'm very, very anti-religion. And that's why I will probably never stop banging on about it.
Which is quite serious, really.
Yes, it really is.
Very serious.
What about faith schools more generally? Do you see them as harmless, or do you think they have a kind of light version of the problem that you're talking about?
They may have a light version of the problem, but it's all, I mean, children really must be given the right to choose themselves which pathway they're going to follow. So any faith school that does not allow that, to me, is not fulfilling the purpose of education. They're actually denying the child its basic human rights. And in my experience, I don't know of a faith-based school that would be that open, but there may be one out there. I don't know.
But you see, when we're looking at that issue, where she's saying, and you know, look, she's supposed to be professional. She's a trained psychologist, and she's even admitted that she still doesn't know how to help people who have been in these religious cults, because it's a very, very deep and profound thing. So she's not got that far. And what she just said is that, you know, she believes that children should be able to make their own choices. But the fact of it is, people, let me bring you back to the fact of it is, choices for what? You see, we are born into certain social arenas, and they're very, very different all over the world. And so if people are born in Afghanistan, if they're born in Pakistan, if they're born in India, if they're born in first world countries, then we are born into very, very different social arenas. You know, some of us have a great deal at our fingertips and vastly more options. And so we will be told that we need to study language and math and bit of science and bit of geography, you know, stuff like that, which are the tools which we're going to need in our society. We've got to be able to communicate, we've got to be numerate so we can, you know, work out our finances, because we're born into our financial matrix. We need social skills, so that's why you're not supposed to do this and you're supposed to do that, and you know, we're all supposed to be, you know, very, very similar in our outlook, and our rules are in Britain that you can't have sex until you're 16, but the rules in Afghanistan, there probably isn't any, and so you've got lots of children walking around with babies and all that sort of thing. It's just different conscious constructs, isn't it? But you see, with societies, depending on how developed they are, society is going to need certain workers. They're going to need people to be able to be practical, so they're going to teach them about the practical skills, and that's why there's, you know, all these apprentices and apprenticeships and this, that and the other. Then, you know, about social skills, because you're going to need to go out there and impress upon people what they need to do and how they should act, and this, that and the other. Maybe you're going to be teachers in some shape or form. There's so many things, but that isn't limitless. It isn't endless, is it? And so when we get people that maybe just they don't want anything to do with any of that, like I didn't at school. I didn't want nothing to do with that. The only subject that I was interested in was geography. And as it turned out, well, it was my destiny to travel the world. And so what about people that are only interested in music? What about people that are only interested in art of some form, painting, drawing, or, you know, being creative or something like that? Where's the facilities, you know, for that in these schools? Very little, really, isn't there? When I was at school, I mean, there was woodwork and there was metalwork. Then there was craft, and we did some, you know, needlework and that sort of thing, sticking things and all that. I don't know how sophisticated schools have got these days and what sort of new tools they are teaching, but whatever they're teaching, it's limited, and so it still doesn't allow the human being to grow in a free way. It's still contained. The only way you're going to allow children to grow in their own way is by just teaching the absolute basics of numeracy, literacy, and some variety of social norms and that sort of thing, and maybe, you know, some sort of business studies, so they know about, you know, you can buy a house and you need to get a job and, you know, you save for your pension, all that sort of thing, because that's what we've born into. But if they wanted to increase people's artistic flair or bring out in our children something what was deeply rooted there, then they would have to speak a great deal more to them. Just saying, like, what do you think you'd like to do? What facility would you like? And then they might start to vocalise, oh, well, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z and all that sort of thing. And then this information should be put before the board of the schools, and then considerations should be made. And then when people are getting older, you know, young adults, well, they must be more inclined to be able to feel what their own destiny entails, and so to have a broader selection of subject matter. But I think there's still a very, very narrow parameter of choices when we go to university. And so we're still not free, are we? You know, by any stretch of the imagination. And there's something else that I wanted to say. Something else about the whole creative level. Yeah, I don't know. It slipped my mind. But let's just listen to a couple more minutes of this, and maybe I'll think about it.
The ones I know about, they're not. They actually restrict the curriculum to such an extent that the child is not given that freedom.
But that's interesting, because that's a different objection to the usual one against faith schools, which is that they breed exclusivity, that they breed sectarian divisiveness, that children become labelled with the badge Catholic or Protestant or Muslim or whatever it is. And you've raised a different point, which could be just as damaging, I would have thought.
Yes, I mean, I think there are a number of different ways of looking at it, aren't there? And perhaps I've picked up on the one that perhaps affected me the most, or has affected the people around me.
Yes. Yeah.
Affected my patients the most, that's right. But they are divisive. I mean, I do know that although the inspectors give some of these schools very good reports, if you look carefully into the reports, you do read comments like, not enough attention is being paid to the understanding of other cultures or other religions. Questioning tends to be rather lacking it's not very challenging, it's not investigating, doesn't encourage the children to explore. So if you look amongst the small print, you will find those comments. And I don't like any form of segregation myself, so I would prefer to see religion and education separated.
Yes.
I'd like to see politics and education separated.
Yes. Not much hope of that under the present government.
No.
Yeah, but the only thing is, you know, to have all these subjects separated, well, they're all a part of what it is to be a human being. Because when we go out into the big world, then we're going to encounter people all over the world, all different sorts of cultures, which have been educated in business and politics and religions. And, you know, they are like, we all have quivers with our arrows in. And, you know, the more educated, the more broad, the more opportunity we've got, I suppose, the more arrows we'll put in our quiver. And so, I mean, the human being is a very, very complex life form, and I'm not sure whether we could address anything like you know, a healthy broad spectrum of vocational choices, and I suppose, well, we get left to our own devices, you know, whether we go to university or not, and you know, when we become adults we become disenchanted maybe, and then we'll decide to do other things, and lots of people do that. They become boxers or sports people or actors or musicians, all different sorts of things which they never were really encouraged to do or taught at school. So I like watching programs like this because we get some insights from varying institutions, you see, And so I can see. I would never be privy to speaking to people like that out in the outside world. Where would I meet them? In the local Indian shop, going up the local supermarket. That's about it. And so I have to hone in on these sort of places to eavesdrop in many different realms of what it is to be a human being. And that's why my subject matter is pretty broad and my consciousness is broad, because I'm incessantly eavesdropping on as many varying different facets that I possibly can as what it is to be a human being. So I'll leave this video here, but let's just see what it's got to say here, because you can always stop this video whenever you want, can't you? So I mean, that's my policy. I could turn it off any time, but then that finishes it. But there might be something useful here.
Does it, do you think, have detrimental effects on the rest of education, in the sense that the child is less inquisitive, less inquiring, less curious?
Yes, I mean, unhealthy religion would not encourage children to ask questions. And the consequences of asking a question could be quite punitive in a way. And the kind of existential questions that children ask when they're young are discouraged, are actively discouraged by
things
a lot
like,
of these
why
groups.
do I exist?
Why do I exist? Or are you really there?
Yes.
You know, or are you just a figment of my imagination? One I had was, well, why does it mean that just because blood was shed on the cross that I'm to be saved? I don't understand that.
I can well believe in that.
I can sympathise with that.
I can well believe it.
And one day, I think it was Billy Graham, I happened to be hearing Billy Graham, this was after we came out of the Brethren actually, he said something about, why do you all think you're going to understand God? God is so much of a higher being. Why should you possibly even think that you could understand him? You just have to accept and have faith. And I thought, oh yes, that's the answer.
Yeah.
And for a while,
Nice
my spirit was quieted for a while,
yes.
but it didn't last very long.
Yes.
But yes, I think as children, the problem with many of these religions is that they don't allow children to ask questions, that naturally inquiring mind of the child is suppressed. And that is very detrimental, because they never see any other perspective. They never hear any other perspective. And so they don't learn to criticise, they don't learn to evaluate what they're hearing. They just blindly accept it, really. And that kind of religion to me is unhealthy.
I suppose there's an inevitable tendency for children to believe what they're told by their elders, their parents, their teachers. But somehow, would it be fair to say that religion gratuitously adds to that inevitable effect?
Well, it does, if there's yet another authoritative being
well,
up
quite
there.
apart from that, I mean, religious education
yes.
Makes it even harder for children to develop the inquisitive curiosity that any good educator
because religion
wish.
is absolute, you mean? Because
Yes.
it tends to say this is the truth.
Yes.
And there is no other truth.
Yes.
This is it. Yes, yes. If you don't believe what they're saying to you, then somehow that's a shortcoming in you. It's turned around. It's you that's lost your faith. It's not the religion that's wrong. It's not the truth that's wrong, or that something's wrong with what they're saying to you. It's you. Somehow it's a shortcoming in yourself. And again, you're made to feel guilty for not believing in it, totally.
Do they actually warn you that there will come a time when people will tell you things that sound different from what you're being told by us?
Oh, yes.
There will come a time when people will tell you to be curious, to ask
Yes.
questions, to think for yourself.
Yes.
And what are you supposed to do about that?
You're supposed to ignore them. You're supposed to regard them as evil. I mean, my brother, who is still in the Exclusive Brethren, has described me as the embodiment of evil. And I'm now doing...
Oh, can you hear this, people? This is exactly what I've been saying. You see, what these religions, these cults, always do, within their poison, they always say that anything outside of their poison is evil, and it's from the devil, and it's from the jinn, and, you know, it's demonic, and all this sort of thing. There should be laws against it. There should be prison sentences brought to these people that are perverting, destroying, and traumatizing young minds. It's got to start coming about sooner or later. Religion has to be destroyed. Absolutely, Abrahamic religions have to be destroyed.
doing Satan's work. So if he hears about this television program, he will see this as yet another example of Jill doing the work of Satan.
And that's because was programmed as a
Yes.
child to expect that kind of thing to happen?
Yes, anything that's outside is evil and wicked, and it mustn't be heard, it mustn't be listened to. And so discussion with the outside world is discouraged. Information coming in is very much controlled, and this is true of any religion, really, especially at that end of the spectrum. It becomes less as you move towards the more open types of religion.
Is there any suggestion that cults like this might actually be investigated by the police?
Oh, come on, come on!
I think that perhaps protection of children from their own parents is something that one ought to seriously think about.
Yes, goodness me. You see, look, Dawkins has been having these conversations for the past 50 years. And so all he's doing in this conversation is just being very diplomatic, and he wants to extract from her certain things because he wants people to see that a psychologist is saying this. So there you go, people. It's not just me, because I'm not a psychologist, so you don't need to believe me. But she's a psychologist, so you should believe her. So that's what he does. He interviews all these different sorts of people to get different walks of life saying the same thing, that religions are poison. And yes, these fuckers should be arrested.
I totally agree with you, actually. I have on many occasions felt the need to talk about, what can we do? What have I done? We say, what have we done in the name of religion? But what have I done to kind of stop it going on happening? Because it is going on happening. As we're sitting here now, there are hundreds of children in schools, in faith-based schools, where they're being educated in the same way that their parents are educating them, in the same way that their church is educating them. The same kind of narrow-minded, blinkered way of looking at the world, that this is the absolute truth, and it's the only way you can think about this.
Perhaps since there is so much public consciousness about child abuse, we should actually start using the phrase child abuse, mental child abuse,
Yes.
For
Yes.
this kind of thing. Not to say that it's necessarily as bad as physical child abuse, but nevertheless, something serious.
Well, it's most certainly longer lasting.
It's not exaggerating to call it child abuse.
I don't think it's exaggerating to call it child abuse, and I've been saying this for some time now. Not everybody agrees with me. They look at you.
What do they
How
say?
can that be? How can it be mental abuse? You know, they're children. Somehow it's not seen as mental abuse. I called it religious abuse earlier, but it doesn't even have to be about religion. If you bring a child up and discourage it from thinking freely and making choices freely, then that's still, to me, that is a form of mental abuse or psychological abuse.
Or if you tell a child that when it dies, it's going to roast forever in hell.
That is abusive. Yes.
I should have thought that was a good candidate for being actually more abusive than at least.
I said in today, maybe, or at least yesterday, that it is in actual fact terrorism. Religious institutions are terrorist organisations. That's what they are. And they should be treated like terrorists, and they should all be rounded up and given maximum sentences for terrorism.
Some milder forms of sexual abuse.
if you think about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm not somebody that likes putting labels on things particularly, but there does seem to be something about trauma that creates a certain constellation of symptoms in people. And there is evidence that prolonged stress in childhood can lead to the same thing. It can lead to, I used to get flashbacks, I still do occasionally, and nightmares and hypervigilance and so on, all these kind of symptoms that people who are traumatised by car accidents, bombings, whatever, also experience. And for me, psychological abuse is just as powerful in provoking that kind of symptomatology as sexual abuse or physical abuse. It can happen, and in my research, I actually demonstrated that quite a high percentage of people were experiencing symptoms similar to those who've been through what's normally accepted as an acceptable trauma. not an acceptable trauma.
No,
I mean,
but,
a trauma that's
yes.
normally accepted by the medical profession as...
And you're talking now about mental abuse of
yes,
the kind that
I
you've
am
just
talking
been...
about mental abuse.
Yes.
Yes.
You yourself are not, if I may say so, a very good advertisement for what you're saying, because you seem so remarkably well adjusted. but
I could, a moment ago, I told you that I was trembling and I was feeling fearful inside. That is kind of a precursor for me sometimes, that I will suddenly have a flashback. And anything can set it off.
Yes.
But it happens perhaps once a year now.
Yes.
But that is a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, and in any case, quite apart from your own feelings, you're a therapist who meets it in patients, and so you can actually
I've seen it. I have objectively
tell us
seen
about
it. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And no doubt many of the patients are in a much worse state than
Yes.
even the worst that you ever.
A lot of the former members of groups, religious groups that I meet, talk about the same kind of symptoms. They talk about nightmares, they talk about intrusive thoughts, they're not wanting to think about it and they're having to think about it. The kind of nightmares, disturbed sleep, anger, all the kind of things that you tend to see in someone who's been through a physical trauma or through sexual abuse.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can show some support by subscribing to the podcast, sharing it with your friends.
There you go, people. That's religion for you. This is why, I'm kind of like pretty well on a witch hunt for religious folk on this channel. I endeavour to bring them to the forefront and to speak with them, try to extract what it is, what their level of indoctrination is, and I'm always trying to get people to come forward to speak with me on a Google Meet chat, but they're all terrified people, and